Hi, I'm Kate Matz with William Bond Company. Today I'm going to be talking about the PPP EZ forgiveness application and the criteria to be eligible for the EZ application as opposed to the full long form for forgiveness. So first off, do want to note that the EZ application is pretty easy if you are able to qualify for it. So it is one short page versus the long form, which is a cover page, a Schedule A, and then also some worksheets to Schedule A, where you would have to list out each and every employee and their wages and their hours worked during your covered period. So a lot more information. It's definitely worth taking a look at the criteria for the EZ application, seeing if you are able to qualify to use that instead. So when they came out with this EZ application, it was a little bit surprising as far as the approach that they took to determine who could use the EZ application and who needed to use the long form. Prior to the release of it, there'd been a lot of talk about kind of a more streamlined way to apply for forgiveness. And most of that centered around a threshold of the loan amount that would kind of be the determining factor. When they came out with the form though, instead of choosing a loan amount to kind of put you in or out of the EZ form, or even an amount of forgiveness, what they really focused in on were the two potential reductions to forgiveness that go into the long form. And that's the compensation reduction and the FTE reduction. So basically, in order to be eligible for the EZ application, you cannot have an FTE reduction or a compensation reduction that would factor into your calculation. There are a couple of exceptions in safe harbor, so we'll go through all of those, but big picture, that's kind of how they're looking at this. Is EZ form is for the folks that don't have either a compensation or FTE reduction. Long form are for the folks that have one or the other or both of those reductions they have to factor into their calculation. So first criterion here to use the EZ application would be if you are an individual who's an independent contractor or sole proprietor, self-employed individual, where your earnings are coming through your Schedule C and you did not have any employees at the time that you applied for your loan. So if you meet that, you automatically qualify for using this EZ application. You don't need to look any further. Going into then looking at number 2 and number 3, and again, there's 3 here, you just have to meet one of them. So these are going to be looking at companies that do have employees. So criterion 2 is a 2-parter, and part A is going to look at compensation reductions, and part B is going to look at if you had reductions in FTEs. So part A says, I didn't have any reductions in wage or salary rates that I was paying to my employees in excess of 25% when I look at my covered period compared back to the period January 1st of 2020 through March 31st of 2020. So if you can answer yes to that you did not have reductions to your employees' wages from your covered period as compared back to that first quarter of 2020, then you meet that criterion. Now, I do want to point out here that this is looking at the wage rates that are in effect for that period of time. This is not the actual dollars that were paid, but actually the rate in effect. So if you had somebody that was earning overtime in the first quarter, and during your covered period, their base rate was the same, but they weren't earning overtime, that would not count against you for purposes here. This is just going back to that base rate that was in effect for each of those periods of time. So then we look at kind of part B here of criterion 2. And again, this goes back to the FTEs, or the number of employees and the average hours that those employees are working. And if when you look at January 1st of 2020 compared to through the end of your covered period, if you did not have reductions in the number of employees or the average hours that you're paying to those employees during that period, then you can check the box and meet that piece of it as well. Now, there are a couple of exceptions here. That would be if you had a reduction in employees because you laid somebody off and then you offered them their job back and they chose to not come back, you're going to be held harmless for that. So that would be an exception. The other exception to this one would be if you had to lay people off and then you tried to rehire, but you could not find folks with the right skill set to bring them back on board, you'll be held harmless for that as well. So again, criterion 2 is two-parter. One being you didn't reduce the wage rates of your employees by more than 25%. And then the second one being you didn't reduce the number of employees or the hours that you're paying your employees, with a couple of exceptions being that maybe you had some folks that just decided not to come back, or you weren't able to find individuals with the proper skill set. So that's criterion 2. If you don't meet that, then you can look at number 3 and see if you qualify for that one. And I'd say that number 3 is kind of the golden ticket. I think that this one is going to be where a lot of companies will be able to find themselves being able to fit into this easy application criteria. So this one is going to start out the exact same way as number 2. So it's also a two-parter, and part A is exactly the same. So being able to certify that you did not reduce the hourly wage rate or the salary rate of your employees by more than 25%, looking at covered period compared to Q1. And then the second part here, or part B of this third criterion, says, you know what? We recognize that we've got a lot of businesses out there that have reduced the number of employees, but it's because it's in response to government mandates or government recommendations that have come out in response to COVID-19. And we really don't want to hold businesses, harmed because of being in compliance with those recommendations. So if you are a business that had to shut down or had to reduce capacity and is operating at a lower level of business activity during your covered period as you were in the pre-COVID period, and that's in response to either a federal or a state or a local mandate or even guidance about social distancing, then you're able to meet this kind of safe harbor for the reason why you've had a reduction to your FTEs. So again, this third criterion says, part A, I didn't reduce wages by more than 25%. And part B says, yeah, but I've had a reduced level of business activity, and that's because I'm following some government mandate or guidelines. So if you are able to meet any one of those 3 criteria, you are eligible for the easy forgiveness application, and that should greatly reduce the effort that you have in putting that together. So hopefully this helped to clarify a little bit on who is eligible for the easy application. Please reach out with any questions. Thanks.